So it's just recently come to my attention that apparently swearing within the first 30 seconds of a YouTube video, it exponentially increases the possibility that you will be demonetized and not advertiser-friendly content. That explains some of the past I Am Games vlogs being completely destroyed. I almost swore right there, ruining my entire point. So going forward, I will try and keep the language to a little clean, squeaky clean in the beginning of these videos, just to kind of avoid losing the 15 to 20 cents that I otherwise would be getting from these videos. Alright, I think we're past it now. Fuck. We'll see what happens. We'll see if this rumor is true. It would be nice. Wouldn't it be great if YouTube, like, actually, I don't know, publicly made their rules and regulations available? You would think that would be in their best interest, because if everybody was aware of how to make money effectively on YouTube, YouTube would get a bigger cut because they would be demonetizing less videos and they'd make more money. But I guess weird progressive politics / tone policing is more important to them than making money. But that's not the point of today's video. Today, we are talking about game developers, big corporate game developers, and how they're being pushed way too hard. I think one of the things we need to remember about these big companies, the EAs and Activisions and Take-Twos and Rockstars of the world, is that we can look at the corporations and their practices and be like, they're pretty fucking scummy. I said fuck. Uh-oh. We'll see if this one gets me in trouble. They're being scummy, but it's very easy to forget the people in the trenches, right? At the end of the day, corporations are just made up of people, and there are people at the top, the board members and the CEOs, who we kind of direct our ire at. It's easy to forget the dozens, if not hundreds, of employees in the trenches who are just schmucks like us, doing their best to make a living in an industry that they probably liked. Maybe it's past tense, maybe they don't like it anymore, considering the conditions they're working in now. There's been tons of stories over the last couple weeks of crazy amounts of crunch in these studios to get these AAA games done. And I feel as if this is a bad precedent to set, and that's a fucking hot take, I know, Lamau. Everyone and their mom has said that at this point. But it just seems like we're pushing these devs really hard for no reason. Getting the games done is great and fine, and I understand that. I understand putting something like Red Dead Redemption 2 together is a titanic undertaking that I can probably not even fathom properly the amount of work that goes into creating something like Red Dead Redemption 2. What I'm more worried about is the fact that there's a lot of effort going into these games that seems unnecessary, and I feel like if maybe these companies were more selective in what they did with these games, perhaps all this crunch would no longer be necessary. And also, us as consumers, I think we kind of have a double standard when it comes to this a lot. Okay, that's like two videos almost in one, so I'm gonna try and go through both of those points. In terms of the developer side, making these huge fucking games, Red Dead Redemption 2 is a great example. It's like the most egregious of all the things I've read that comes to mind. Did we really need realistic behaving ball sacks on horses in Red Dead Redemption 2? Is that really where time should have gone in development? Was that necessary? Do we need immersion to that level of detail? Because there were people who spent time working on a system to have testicles move and function realistically. I can't even believe this is a sentence I'm saying right now. This is such a non-issue, something that should not need to be done. I don't think anyone was playing Red Dead Redemption 1 and was like, where are the balls on my horses? This is bullshit. I'm not going to point off the score on Metacritic because it doesn't have realistic balls. There are tons of examples of things like this in games, things that I don't think really need to be there. And this is kind of, I guess, a subsection of the industry's constant push for realism, because realism is the easiest way to benchmark graphical performance, right? We have an entire kind of business model in terms of hardware where the big pushes are more pixels, more polygons, all that kind of stuff. Ever since, forever really, but I think it was around the time of the late 90s with the PlayStation and the N64 and stuff, where graphics really started to be something that was super heavily focused on, just because now with the advent of 3D, realistic reacting environments became something that was feasible, not really able to be accomplished with that level of technology, but it really was at that point where graphics became super fucking important. And every generation since then, the big selling point for the next generation of consoles has been better graphics. And are we at the point where graphics need to continually be improved. Like, I understand, like, if you're selling us a new box every 5 to 10 years, there really isn't much of an argument to make outside of, hey, we have better graphics. You know, technology has improved and we can bring down high-end performance to a consumer level, a relatively low-cost product. You know, $300 for the kind of video performance you're getting out of these consoles is pretty good, especially when they first launched. That was good performance for the money, and it was made really accessible to the average consumer who wouldn't want to put together a PC for 2 to 3 times the price and deal with all the headaches to get similar levels of performance. So that's great, but it feels like the closer we get to realism, the more kind of vast the uncanny valley becomes, and the more legwork that has to be put into minor things that 2 or 3 generations ago you could fudge it and not have to worry about it because it wasn't super realistic anyway. So things like actual physical reacting ball sacks on horses was not something anyone needed to worry about because you couldn't scrutinize the game to that level to begin with. But now you do. Now everything has to be photorealistic. And if we're going to keep selling better graphics, maybe stylized visuals are something we can think about. What are the 2 biggest game phenomenons over the last 5 to 10 years? It's been Fortnite and Overwatch. And both of those games do not have photorealistic graphics. They're heavily stylized. And in fact, I would argue Fortnite probably has the stylized visuals it does because of the success of Overwatch. Those games can get away with less technical visuals because they put more focus onto the artistic side, right? They're not as technically complicated as something like Red Dead Redemption 2, but they still look good because the art style makes up for that fact. You can run Overwatch on a relatively crappy computer at decent frame rates because you're using stylized graphics, which still look good without having to have every last little piece of hair reacting in real time on Winston's entire body. This would be a way to cut costs because you wouldn't have to spend the time, you know, setting up a realistic reacting like fur engine on a giant human gorilla sort of guy, and you can just texture paint it and let it be that. Simplification, streamlining of both the visuals and a lot of the technical things on these games would allow us to avoid a lot of this crunch, I feel, taking a lot of the busy work, a lot of the empty visual presentation in this endless pursuit of realism, having to find a way to like have high resolution enough textures so every last little detail of a character's iris is completely rendered in the right way and has the correct mapping. It's just like, this is a lot. This is a lot of extraneous work. And I understand from like a technical demo standpoint, you know, every generation when we get a little bit closer to photorealism, it is impressive. It is incredibly impressive to see something like this. But I have to ask, is it worth it to have entire staff in these companies working 70, 80, 100-hour weeks? And then it's something like Fortnite keeps adding more features because of the service, the way it works, that you have to constantly be adding more and more features to keep people engaged. And that kind of brings me to the second part, because content is different than visuals. I was just making a visuals argument, which I think we can probably pare them down or kind of move more towards artistic expression as opposed to making visuals look more realistic. But from the consumer side, we're constantly asking for more content, right? Let's talk about Fortnite versus Apex Legends. I think this is a great example of what I'm talking about with the double standard of a lot of consumers. Not everybody, clearly, but a lot of people. Fortnite is incredibly successful because it's a game that's constantly pushing out updates. And there's reports coming out of Epic that there's 100-hour crunch weeks on the Fortnite team to constantly get this content continually going. With a game that's single player, you have a product, you launch it, and then you have some post-content updates that you sell as DLC or microtransactions or whatever, and that's it. Crunch lasts for like a month or 2, which is still bad, but it's not the end of the world. With Fortnite, because it's a service, it's a game that never ends. There's no end to it. The idea is to keep drip-feeding people content to keep them playing as long as possible, which, as in of itself, isn't a bad thing, really? Not necessarily. But the problem comes because now the staff that's working on Fortnite doesn't just have a 2-month crunch period before the game launches. Now, it's just continuous, because you have to keep pushing content. And people get mad at Epic for forcing the Fortnite team to work 100+ hours a week to keep the game going. However, we then look at something like Apex Legends, which Respawn is on record saying the reason they don't have content coming out so much is because when the game launched, they decided to let their staff take a bit of a break. They busted their ass to make this and they don't want to overwork them, so content is coming out way slower. And what's the problem with Apex? Everyone's pissed off that the game hasn't had any major updates and there's still a lot of bugs in there that haven't been fixed. And because there's not enough content coming out, people are pissed off about Apex Legends and stop playing it. So we, the consumers, are saying, yeah, stop working your guys hundreds of hours a week, but also keep the content coming as fast as 100-hour work weeks allow. At some point, we're going to have to make a choice. Do we want our games to constantly be updating and constantly be fixed and have this continual stream of content to keep us satisfied at the expense of the developers that we claim to care about? Or do we have to say, you know what, the Apex Legends model might not be the best for us as consumers, but it's allowing the people who are working on the games that we love so much to get a fucking breather every now and then, and that's more important than having new knickknacks every 3 to 5 days. I think at some point we need to make a choice about that. And that's on us as consumers to kind of send a clear message to these developers which we value more. And I think so far we're making it pretty clear that we value the extra work at the expense of the people, because those people are just nameless, faceless individuals working in the trenches that we don't ever see. It's easy to forget that there are people behind there, especially when they're working on projects so complicated that most of us can't even understand how they're made. And then on the developer side, we've locked ourselves into this model of pushing photorealism and constantly making it more difficult and require more work to do the same thing. You know, making a tree on the PlayStation 1 required 2 images at incredibly low resolution in a cross format to make them kind of work in a 3-dimensional space. Now, trees need to have every last little leaf be fully modeled. And I know trees aren't the best example because you can have them auto-generated by software now, but the point still stands. To make an asset in a modern game requires exponentially more work than it did 10-15 years ago. And so that just means everything in video games requires more effort. And the closer we get to photorealism, the more obvious the gap becomes between what's in the game and what's in real life. Both sides of the equation have to make decisions, I feel, because I don't think having people working 100 hours a week in perpetuity is the answer. I think that's wrong. I think a lot of us would agree that's wrong. Would any of you want to be at your job for 100 hours a week forever? That's all I got for this video. I don't know how well this one is going to go over, but it's just something that's been on my mind and bothering me a lot, reading all these stories the last month or so, all these exposés about all these companies. It's like when the Anthem thing came out, the dam burst, and everyone started coming out with their hashtag #MeToo stories on Game Dev Crunch, and it's real disappointing. You know, on the one hand, like, we kind of glorify that work hard attitude, but at the same time, you know, there are real people who are struggling for it. It's not that these people are really choosing to do it. When you're working for an employer that's telling you got to put in those hours, it's different than like someone like me if I was working 100 hours a week on my game or whatever. You know, I'm one guy choosing to do that in my spare time. Don't get me wrong, I'm not working 100 hours a week on Azumi, but just for an example's sake. Like, comment, subscribe, all that junk. I guess, you know, YouTube's algorithms are still in effect. Hopefully my swearing was pushed back far enough that this video won't get demonetized. Patreon.com/polystation2 if you like my rants. I try and do a couple of these every week. And I'm getting back into scripted videos. Just wrote a really nice script for a video that will probably be coming out in a couple weeks once I'm done getting all the edits for it. I think you'll really enjoy it. I'm actually pretty proud of this one. If you don't want to give me $1, if I'm not a creator you like, there's a ton of us out there. So just... somebody needs the money. If it's not going to be me, you know, maybe get a medium coffee instead of a large coffee this week and put that $1 in a creator's cup that you really like. So that's all I got for today. Have a good one, guys. I'll talk to you later. Never forget to be the games you want to see. Yeah, I'm bringing that back. I forgot. I keep forgetting to say it, but I remember this time.